So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the election of Pope Francis to the Catholic papacy. The first Francis, he's named after Francis of Assisi, who's a saint, a patron, the Jesuit order. However, Pope Francis is the first Jesuit pope. The Jesuits actually have their leaders usually referred to as the Black Pope, and I'm not really sure how the hierarchy of these orders go now. But I guess it's possible that he's the first actual Black Pope who's also Catholic Pope. You know what I mean? He may be simultaneously the leader of the Jesuits and Catholicism as a whole. I'm really not sure about that though.
So the Jesuits are Catholic?
Yeah,
Or
the
like
Jesuits
a subsect within
are a Catholic
Catholicism?
order. They were ordained as a response to the Protestant Reformation. They were ordained as almost like a warrior order, defenders of Christ,
Okay.
defenders of Christendom and the Church. The Jesuits actually engaged in a lot of mass education. They're a very intellectual order, a very interesting group of people. There are a lot of conspiracy theories about the Jesuits. I've never seen anything really that I consider truly credible, but that might just be my own ignorance in that
Hmm.
matter. But I don't know. I think the Jesuits are fairly interesting as far as Catholicism goes.
Right, right. I mean, I do know that they're against sort of the glitz and glamour of
Yes.
the priestly life, especially if the as far as Pope Francis goes. I know he's given up some. I forget exactly what it was, but it
The
was
papal apartments, for
right,
example,
right.
he doesn't use those. Obviously, a lot of them are symbolic gestures. But what I think about Pope Francis is that he is. I think he's attempting to guide the church toward more of the covenant of works that is action. The true message of Christ in that way, rather than the corruption we've seen in the church. I think he's a reformer, is what I think. I think he's trying to reform aspects of the greater Catholic Church, which may be the only thing that saves the Catholic Church.
Absolutely. I mean, I think they're in dire need of it, especially after, with, under the last pope with all the pedophilia charges and it being covered up. I think they're in dire need of a reformation.
Right. Our last Hitler Youth Pope,
Mm.
Pope Benedict.
I think it's ironic that Reformation, when you think of Reformation in the Catholic Church, that it's being done through a pope actually talking like Jesus, using the words of the Bible the correct way,
Yeah,
and
right.
and that's considered a Reformation. That's considered revolutionary to some of the Catholic people that are shocked by the way he speaks. I think that shows a disconnect of the Christian people towards their own teachings that they say that they believe in.
Hmm.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, it's almost shocking to me that now I sit here and see Catholicism as being perhaps one of the most radical or revolutionary aspects of Christianity, you know, especially compared to, the born agains in this country and in the
Yeah.
United States, whose, ideology is far from revolutionary, it's far from being emancipatory. Pope Francis, it seems like he's actually preaching and acting in a manner that's in accordance with the New Testament, with the four canonical Gospels, with the message as we interpret it of, you know, uh, Yeshua ben Yusuf, Jesus Christ. So,
Hmm.
It is really interesting. Some of the things that he said, what he's trying to get trying to get the church away from the politics and focus on deeds of helping the poor and helping the misfortunate. And it's kind of ironic that the words that he says is actually springing him into the political platform as this he's being used by a lot of politicians in America, being quoted in that And it's ironic because he's actually trying to do the opposite. He's trying to say, like when he was asked about gay rights issues, and he said, "Who am I to judge a person for what they want to do?" And he keeps reiterating this idea of we're supposed to help the poor. We're supposed to create this equality of between the rich and the poor, and help people like that. And it's funny that most of the time when people are a lot of the politicians are forgetting about that are using him. They're using his words in a way to kind of put him into this political sense, and a lot of people are actually looking at him as if he's a radical. I mean, it's ironic, like I said, that here's a guy who's speaking the words of his faith, and that's now somehow radical.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll say, I don't consider the man to be truly radical. I see him as a reformer, and I certainly love what he's doing within the church. I don't see him as being radical. I think the politicians, like you said, are treating him as a radical because, these are ideas that they just don't want to hear in this time of austerity. I mean, you have Paul Ryan, who, claims to be a very devout Catholic, criticizing the Pope for his comments on capitalism. It's almost as if Paul Ryan is holding a Bible with one hand and Ayn Rand's collected works with the other, and trying to decide what the hell to do with them when they're completely at odds.
Right. Yeah, it's almost as if these hardcore right-wingers that are into the whole unfettered capitalism sort of hide behind the Bible as like an excuse to make up for how heinous the effects of some of these capitalistic policies are. Say, oh well, I'm Christian. It's all good. I worship Jesus, so.
Right.
But it's also interesting that if you really look at it, a lot of the Ayn Randian objectivist philosophy is actually was a huge influence with Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan, which I find laughably ironic. That it's not only the crux of a lot of our Republicans, but it's also the crux of the Satanists also. So.
Right. Yeah. It's it's kind of laughable. And when you look at Christian ideology, the Catholic Church has always promoted this covenantism, that salvation comes not purely through faith but also through good works. Right? Now, a lot of the Protestant faiths, especially the evangelicals in this country, believe that man can be saved, quote unquote, through faith alone, that if you accept Christ as your Savior, it really doesn't matter what you do, you will be saved, right? Whereas a lot of the Catholic teachings, and especially I think this is what Pope Francis is bringing back to the fore, is that it also takes good works. It also takes acting in accordance with the principles of the New Testament, right? That is, to not judge your fellow man, right? I mean, society shall be judged by how you treat the least of these, right? That is the true message of Christendom, I think. It's not... one reading of the New Testament is that Christ was not talking about an afterlife when he spoke of the kingdom of God. When he spoke of the kingdom of God, he was speaking of an exceptional society that we could create on earth within our lifetimes if we followed these basic principles. That you could bring about a good and saved society within your worldly life, right? And I think this is the kind of thing Pope Francis is talking about, that you need to act in accordance with Christian principles, not merely read the Bible and believe in Christ, but act in a Christ-like way.
Right. It's almost as if these people, again, sort of hide behind the Bible, sort of hoping that there is an afterlife, and it's sort of going to save them for all the bad deeds they do. Hoping, well, if I if I follow the Bible and I follow Christ, then maybe I'll get into heaven for how many hellish things I've brought upon the earth, you know.
Isn't that just another kind of utopianism? You know, that you believe at some point there'll be a perfect society or a perfect life, and that you really don't need to do anything in the here and now to bring it about. I mean, isn't it just kind of it's kind of lazy ideology, I think.
It definitely is.
You know, the thing that amazes me about the people like that, like, let's use the born agains as a perfect example. You know, a lot of people who become born agains, they do a lot of things in their lives that they regret, and then typically the Christian faith gets them at a point where they're at a pretty low point in their life, and they need something to make them feel that life is worth going on. So they adopt Christ, they accept Jesus into their lives, and they become this born again. But it's ironic because a lot of the born agains that I talk to are some of the most racist, most bigoted people that I've ever met in my entire life. They completely press their views on people. They're completely closed-minded towards the acceptance of people who are different than them. They say, well, you got to accept Jesus. You got to accept Jesus. You know, Jesus was never trying to force anybody to believe what he was saying. He was just speaking. You know, he didn't shove any sort of ideology down people's throats. In fact, he was trying to push people away to see that, you know, stop these beliefs that you're having in your church. You know, he was speaking revolution in the truest sense. And, you know, none of these born agains, and the vast majority of people who follow Christ's teachings don't have any clue what Christ was actually saying. And that's what's so amazing. You know, when Pope Francis was first inducted, you know, what do? He goes to the place for wayward youths and is washing these troubled youths' feet. You know, I mean, would you have seen Pope Benedict doing that? No. You know, Pope Francis is the epitome of what Christ was. He is trying to be like Christ. And is that not what the Pope is supposed to be anyway? Is he not supposed to be the direct link to God on earth? Right. You know, so if, you know, when these Christians, you know, when they want to sit around and talk about, you know, being like Christ and living the Christian lifestyle, you know, maybe you should watch Pope Francis and take a couple pages out of his book, and instead of demonizing people, instead of, you know, talking about gay rights issues and abortion and all this other stuff, you know, why don't you actually do some good acts for people instead of complaining about what other people are doing, and, you know, take responsibility for your own actions.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, Christ was no doubt a social reformer as far as a religious icon. I mean, let's not forget, he was killed by the dominating religion, the dominating culture at that time, and the dominating, you know, political campaign at that time. He was a threat to all those institutions. Yeah. So to sort of live up in his image is to sort of be continuously reforming the dominator culture. But yeah, he's fascinating. There is a part of me though that sort of wonders if this whole Pope Francis thing, my cynical side at least, if this is just a PR campaign by the Catholic Church, if they're just using Pope Francis as a way to sort of redeem themselves after the whole pedophilia issue that went on.
I wonder that as well, because obviously as a political organization, the Catholic Church must realize that they were certainly at a turning point. After John Paul, they elected Pope Benedict because, you know, it's the talk at the time was they wanted to elect a older pope because they knew they were going to need time to reform the church. They were going to need to change the church's direction, which seems to be what we have in Pope Francis. So certainly, the Catholic Church is a political organization. And I'm not saying that this is not calculated, right? But Francis himself, he seems... it seems to me that far from being a puppet of the College of Cardinals, that he really does have his own voice. Now, whether or not they elected him to have that voice or he's taken it upon himself, I don't know. Yeah. But certainly he has the interest of the survival of the church at stake. You know, he's like I said, he's a reformer, not a revolutionary. But if he's taking the church in a more positive direction than it has gone in the last, well, Christ, centuries. I mean, yeah, we only have to look to the 1940s to see that the church was supporting fascism. Then I think it's a good thing, you know, and it certainly is more in line with the emancipatory revelation of Christendom, you know. Because the promise of Christendom, you know, is very beautiful. You know, the practice of it, you know, obviously, you know, a lot of us don't resonate with Christendom very much. You know, it's alienating in a lot of ways. But the true message of Christendom is about universal salvation, universal freedom.
Right.
You know, that's the core message beyond whatever churches and groups may do. And I think Pope Francis is trying to bring that back into light. He's trying to spread the message of social justice, economic justice, rather than, you know, this whole political dogma that we associate with the Catholic Church.
Right. And which is why he's being labeled a socialist and a Marxist. Some really great quotes.
I like what he said about Marxism. He, Rush Limbaugh accused him of being a Marxist, and Pope Francis said something along the lines of, I've had many Marxist friends, I've known many Marxists, and they all seemed like perfectly nice people. That's just how simply he put it, right. You know, which I thought was a great response to a guy like Rush Limbaugh.
And you know, he even says himself, don't call us a Marxist, call us Christian. I mean, I think Marxism, even though doesn't go completely with Christianity, I think it adheres to the basic tenets of Christianity much more than capitalism does.
Most certainly. Capitalism doesn't really resonate with any religious tradition at all. I mean,
except for Satanism.
Yeah, well, yeah, and, you know, in some ways, yeah. Sure. Although I think a lot of Satanists might tell you that they're, you know, libertarians.
Right.
You know, they believe in marketism but not statism. You know what I mean?
True.
It's, you know, but that's just kind of conjecture.
You know, I was thinking about what you guys were saying earlier about, you know, if it was a calculated move by the Catholic Church to elect Pope Francis, I mean, how soulless would the Catholic Church have to be if that was the case? You know, I mean, here you are, you know, you're supposed to be the representation of this Christ teachings, and I mean, that would just be.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past them.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean, we've seen it in the past. I mean, I mean, obviously the church is not this squeaky clean organization. You know, there's been a lot of political issues of the past of manipulating things and what have you. But
for
I mean,
1,500 years, it's been a political organization.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, it just, you know, God, man, that'd be some pretty good acting on the part of Pope Francis if that was the case. I don't think, you know who Pope Francis reminds me of is he reminds me of JFK.
He does.
He has a lot of good ideas. He's sweeping. Well, I mean, JFK swept the nation by storm, but you know, Pope Francis is sweeping the world by storm, and he has that energy and charisma about him. And it's kind of funny because obviously, you know, he's much older than what JFK was, but he's got that energy about him, and people respond to him, and that's power. And it's nice to see that he's still preaching. You know, the message that he's preaching the equality for all, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing to see in a religious leader, especially when you have other religions of the world who are really at odds with each other. You know, it's nice to see one of these major religious leaders saying, you know, hey, let's remember what our books are teaching us.
Right. And like he even says in the article by Paul Brandy's Rauschenbusch, I think you pronounce it, on the Huffington Post.
Rauschenbusch.
He claims that the god of money is the ultimate form of idolatry, worldly idolatry. That if you worship money, you really honestly can't call yourself a Christian. So, and I think that's beautifully put. I really do think that this needs to be addressed, that we are a little bit too obsessed with money to the point that we're willing to sacrifice, billions of lives and livelihoods over pursuing it. And I can only really commend him for putting that out and willing to take a stand for that.
I agree. And how is it more clear? You go on Wall Street, what is it? Merrill Lynch has a statue of a golden bull, a golden calf, out front of their building on Wall Street, the center of the world's financial community. How much more clear does it have to be that money is idolatry, right? I mean, if you're a true faithful Christian, how much more clear does it have to be that the worship of money is idolatry? I mean, it's there it is, the center of power right there on Wall Street. They have a statue of a golden bull. I mean, it's amazing the brazenness of this new religion of capitalism.
Absolutely.
I wonder sometimes, these. I wonder how many people actually understand what it is that they even believe in. A lot of the times, the person calls himself Catholic, they call himself Christian. Even Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people of a lot of different faiths who are completely hypocrites when it comes to their actual faiths and beliefs. Where we're sitting here specifically talking about Christianity, and Christianity, there's a large portion of this country that is Christian based, and you don't really have to go too far in this country to meet a Christian who's a complete hypocrite. I mean, every single person is a hypocrite when it really gets down to it. But if you're going to tout a book in front of me and you're going to misrepresent and misquote the Bible verses, but go to Mass on Sunday or talk about how much you love Jesus and how much of a Christian you are, maybe you should know the teachings of your book. And actually, if the Christians who say that they're Christian preached and did the things that are in the Bible, the good acts that they're supposed to be doing, this nation would be a lot different. There'd be a lot of actually really good people in this nation. But
absolutely. Honestly, we'll include a link to the Sermon on the Mount in this video. Go and read that and tell me how much you think our society falls in line with Christian values.
Right.
I challenge you to read the Sermon on the Mount and say that this is a Christian nation, or that anywhere in the West is a Christian nation. I challenge you to do that.
Yeah, it's definitely it is ironic, because you will see, and I mean, even a lot of like criminal organizations, like the Italian mafia, for example, they're super big into the Catholic Church. They all go, they're all about going to Mass on Sunday and following God and all that. But then, they're going during their jobs, going and murdering people and putting hits on people. So it's like, how much do these people really believe whatever it is that they're following, and how much is it just like a facade or some sort of like insurance that at the end, when they're being judged, they could say, oh, well, if they're being judged, they could say, oh, well, hey, I went to church, at the very
I went to
least.
confession.
Right.
And I also wonder how many people in this country actually understand the difference between baptism, Baptist faith, Presbyterianism, Anglicism.
Right.
I wonder how many people understand the differences between the various Protestant sects and Catholicism and Orthodoxy when it comes to Christianity. I think all these lines have been blurred so much, people just don't really understand. Which is not really a critique of people in general. It's just that those are the times that we live in, right? I mean, especially in the United States and a lot of Western nations, religion just doesn't mean as much as it did. Especially organized religion, which you could say that's a good thing or a bad thing. But when you have really hardcore people like the born agains in this country, I mean, look, this is the most powerful country in the world, and you have a very vocal group of fundamentalist born again Christians who, I'm sorry, are pretty insane in a lot of ways. Then it begins to get dangerous, right?
Oh yeah, especially when they're showing up to rallies with M16s on their backs.
Yeah.
And how is that? I mean, that's a complete hypocrisy in and of itself. You're going to show up to a rally with an M16 on your back, with a Bible in your hand, and then you're going to talk about the sanctity of human life. I mean, you got a thing on your back that's capable of taking out a small group of people.
Or you'll protest abortion by blowing up an abortion clinic and killing people, right?
Exactly.
And then you'll go and you'll support the death penalty, but you'll at the same time blow up that abortion clinic. I mean, there's a level of hypocrisy there that's
absolutely
pretty clear.
And I mean, you can find that with any religion, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that goes back to the deeper root, the deeper dangers of ideology, which we've talked about before. You follow too much into an ideology, and when it gets skewed with political beliefs, and it can really make you do some really atrocious things that really go against a humane moral code. So
I can see that kind of thing happening in the name of atheism as well.
Absolutely.
For myself, I am not an atheist, nor do I agree with fundamentalist atheists, nor do I agree with even the intellectual position like Richard Dawkins,
Right.
But, for example, when atheist groups put up billboards or by the sides of buses, advertisements, essentially just like marginalizing people's religions, I don't think that helps in any way, because it just serves to polarize people. Like, I see atheism as just another dogma, just another form of fundamentalism, which is no more healthy or helpful than extremist Christianity or extremist Islam. I just don't see it as being helpful or intellectually viable. It's a intellectually bankrupt ideology, just the same as any kind of extremism.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, even throughout history, there's been some horrendous atheists that have done, horrible things.
Right.
Mao, for example.
Stalin. Right. Religious intolerance in any form, I think, is negative. Whether it's coming from one religious group or an atheist group,
Right.
Religious intolerance is just a net negative. Especially if you look at all the world religions, the golden thread they talk about that unites all religion are the same basic core principles. You have the golden rule: do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. You find that everywhere in philosophy,
Right.
and religion. We are our brother's keeper, all these things. You find the same basic concepts of common human decency in all religion. And those are the things we need to focus on. We shouldn't focus on, pick and choose the little differences. We need to focus on the big similarities.
Yeah. But then it makes you wonder, what good is it? If you're going to call yourself a Christian and read the Bible all the time and go to church, but then you're going to you're going to rally behind something that's, homophobia groups or whatever, you name it. It's like, what good is it? If you're dedicating this much time to researching and learning about this, and then you're going to go and totally, like you said, be a hypocrite about it, in the end, what good is it?
It's a good point.
I think, in this country, we're founded on this idea of separation between church and state. And very recently, we've been trying to destroy that limit while simultaneously trying to broaden it. And it's kind of funny because, you had when the Affordable Care Act happened, the nuns, what was it, in Colorado? That were suing the Obama administration and went to the Supreme Court over contraception. Now, you're nuns. Under your religious belief, you don't need. So just because under the Affordable Care Act, it gives the person the right to have contraception. Doesn't mean that somebody is coming and forcing you to take contraception. You're a nun. You don't need it based on your religious belief.
Right. They only were really saying that your employees, the employees of these Catholic organizations, needed to be extended the right of insurance to purchase contraception.
Exactly. And that's the thing that, each person is allowed to practice their faith as strictly or as openly as they choose. That's really the separation between church and state. It's being allowed to live a life of prosper in this country and to have equal rights, but to still be allowed to practice your religion however you choose to practice. So if you choose not to use contraception, or if you choose to be against gay people, that's that's your personal belief. But like another example of the Supreme Court recognized gay marriage on the federal level, and now you're having these loopholes being done in states where they're saying, well, my religious belief says that I can't support gay people. Well, that doesn't mean that you can refuse the service of a person based on their sexuality. That's discrimination. Right. That is illegal.
And the court has already said you can't discriminate against someone, refuse them service on account of their race. So why is sexuality,
Oh, exactly. But then they're gonna hide behind their religion and that. But yet they talk about they want a we have this separation of church and state. Well, if that's the case, then why are you trying to blur the lines, and why are you trying to integrate the church into the political atmosphere of saying, well, I'm a Christian and I don't believe in gay marriage. So because I don't believe in gay marriage, I'm going to, even though the law states that gay people are allowed to get married, I'm not going to support that. I mean, that there's so many things that is just such a massive hypocrisy.
And that whole thing, it just seems inane to me. I don't understand why, if you don't agree with gay marriage, then don't marry a gay person. If you don't agree with abortion, then don't fucking have one. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's that simple. It's really that simple. And supporting gay marriage in terms of a government legal level, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden your priest or your pastor is going to be forced to marry gay people in your church, and you're going to be forced to go. Yeah, that's not what that means. And certainly I would never support that. If your church doesn't support gay marriage, I don't think it should be forced to have to provide marriages in the church, right? Because marriage is a contract. A private entity doesn't need to be forced to perform marriages in their church, all right? That's fine. If you don't want gay people getting married to your church, okay, whatever. I doubt that any gay couple would want to be married in your church. Exactly. So that's okay, but it's none of your business. What happens in the courthouse or in a more progressive church or in any kind of religious institution that doesn't have your beliefs, it doesn't matter when it comes to the rule of law, right? So,
and that's exactly why that's exactly why it's so dangerous, because these people, they can't allow room for anything that contradicts their beliefs.
Right.
They won't allow it. So anything that even remotely goes against what they perceive as the truth is automatically perceived as the enemy. And that therein lies the danger in any ideology, any religion, or philosophy, you name it. People will often say, "Oh, well, Buddhism, they don't do these violent acts," and it's like, that's not true.
It isn't true. Right.
In Nepal, there's actually a pretty new uprising. They actually call the guy the Bin Laden of Buddhism. That's going against the Muslims in Nepal. And I mean, they very much will use violence to defend their beliefs and to take political action. So
Hindus as well. They're violent Hindus. The Tamil Tigers. That's a Hindu organization in Sri Lanka. You know, it's a terrorist organization, violent, you know. Obviously, there's violence between Hindus and Muslims all the time in India.
Right.
You know, there are violent people in all religions, you
Absolutely.
know. All religions preach peace, but there are extremists in every religion who don't abide by that, you know. So, I mean, nobody's above reproach, you know, and nobody is entirely in the wrong. You know?
Right, and then like you said too, these scientific atheists that will say, "Oh, you know, we have to use reason to sort of dissect these religions and sort of get rid of all religion," and I think that's the wrong approach also, because like we were saying, atheists are obviously just as liable to use these violent means on people, and I don't think pure rationalism is going to make you immune to making these hasty, violent choices towards other people.
Yeah.
I think it's something that's deeper than that. It's and I think it does have something to do with quote unquote a spiritual understanding of reality and a spiritual thread that underlines everything. That once you find the common ground that's beneath everything, only then like you could truly have an acceptance towards it all.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's it's certainly telling the level of hypocrisy and danger that a lot of fundamentalists pose to modern society. But at the same time, it's telling just how our cultural biases provide a danger to society as well. You know, it's I think it goes beyond just religious differences in a lot of ways. You know, people combine their religion with their culture, their upbringing, the economic system. You know, I mean, in terms of atheism, you know, Francis Fukuyama's The End of History, you know, that neoliberal capitalist democracy would bring peace to the entire world, right? He wrote this in the 90s. This rational kind of atheistic, scientifically based capitalist society would bring about the end of war. Well, we haven't seen that. You know, we haven't seen that at all. So I mean, radical solutions are necessary then, and I think they're going to have to include the religions, because people are not going to give up their religions.
No.
Nor do I think they necessarily have to.
No.
I have no issue with whatever people believe. People can believe whatever the hell they want. You know, just as long as it doesn't encroach into other people's rights.
Yeah, I agree with that to a point. I think if we pulled back the whole religious aspect of things, and you know, I mean, you can sit and you can read whatever you want, you can believe whatever you want in your own time in your own house, but you know, there's a way to go about a society, because too often we see people putting their religious and their personal beliefs into the societal structure, and I guess it would then say, you know, well, how do you go into a conversation without your own personal beliefs, your own personal ideologies? And you know, obviously that it's easier said than done. But I think that if you sat down a person from each major faith and you were able to somehow strip away, you know, the look of each person, the garb of each person, where it was just people, no one saw the differences of each person. And if everyone was behind a veil and they were all talking and there was no access, you know, so you wouldn't be able to know who was speaking like what, I think you would find a huge commonality in everyone. And then I think once the veil was dropped, then everyone would see that, oh wow, look at this. You know, here's a Muslim, a Christian, a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Taoist, you know, every other religion under the sun, you know, but everybody's agreeing on certain base things on, you know, but this would be a conversation obviously on how do we create a society in which everyone is able to live a good and prosperous life, and prosperous in the way where, you know, all your needs are met, you know, you're able to provide for your family and things of that nature. And I think everyone would agree on that these are things that people need. But I think that the personal beliefs and the personal ideologies, especially that are religiously based, are what hold a lot of people back from being able to do this.
Yeah.
I saw a documentary just a few days ago, and it was a collection of mystics from various faiths, like you were talking about, talking on cultural and spiritual subjects. And it is profound how much the people who actually understand the true message of their faiths agree on everything. It's that golden thread, again, that runs through all religion, these core principles. These principles, the core principles of all religion are probably buried in our collective unconscious, right? Mm-hmm. They're archetypes. And, and one person in that group, and these were, African shamans, Sufis, Hindu mystics, Buddhist mystics, Taoists, Christian, Catholic mystics, Jewish mystics. One of them said that, religious people always have conflict and disagree, but spiritual people almost never disagree. Mm. Right? It's that kind of distinction between dogma, right, which is basically, an existentialist might call it the essence rather than the existence, those dogmatic principles that you hold, rather than your true beliefs, true individuality, right? It's these lies that get in the way, these layers of culture, ideology, indoctrination that really get in the way.
So in other words, it's doctrine about God over direct experience of God.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And how we go about doing that, I don't know. I have my opinions on that, actually. I think that there are some surefire ways to have a direct experience of God. And I don't think it's through reading a text, although I think reading a text is important in the sense that it allows you to sort of articulate the experience, gives you a language for it. But I don't think reading the text or the doctrine without the experience, it just leaves you in the dark. It just gives you a dogma to follow.
Yeah.
So you need both. And I think we're missing one side of the equation here that we need to regain.
It was the very first Pope Benedict who said, "Religion is nothing more than the physical representation of spirituality. It is not meant to offer enlightenment. It is merely meant to offer the physical representation thereof." And I think that sums it up perfectly. One of the interesting things is when you go into a lot of religious ceremonies, they're very physical. It's this, the regurgitation of the scriptures and the readings. Very, very ritualistic in these physical things that people are doing. But rarely do they ever sit and actually talk about the teaching and dissect the teaching and look at it from a spiritual aspect. And I think that leads a lot of the people inside of the religions to then kind of have a disconnect from the spiritual aspect of it and think that, this regurgitation of being able to recite a scripture verse is somehow makes them religious or makes them spiritual when reality it just makes them really good at memorizing something.
Right.
And they're not really having a spiritual connection with, maybe there is people that when they read the scripture that somehow they feel, the essence of their religion inside of them. But I have a hard time believing that every single person who claims to be a religious person is truly a spiritual person.
I agree.
Absolutely.
And it kind of brings me back to something I'd like to talk about, Pope Francis. Pope Francis is talking about, for example, there's an article that I saw about him blessing a statue that an artist had made. I believe the statue was called Homeless Jesus. Now this statue is of Christ wrapped in his shroud, sleeping on a park bench. Okay? It's a bronze statue. And it was rejected by several cathedrals in North America And it ended up in Vatican City. And Pope Francis went and he saw it and he blessed it. And he said that this is really the true representation of Christ, right? This homeless man sleeping on a park bench. Okay? And Pope Francis went, said a blessing over it, because truly that's the message of Christendom right there. That even the Savior himself was the least of these, right? And what that conveys, his devotion to this statue above all the other religious iconography in the Vatican, is that action takes precedence over dogma. Right? So what can you do, like, as a religious spiritual person or as a non-spiritual person, to make the world a better place? I mean, this is really what the message is. And that's the core message of Christendom. That's the core message of all religious doctrine. It's action. Right? What can you possibly do to create heaven on earth? Like, let's not worry about heaven in the afterlife. None of us know about that.
Right.
Right? What can we do now? And I think this project in general that we're doing here, I think we encourage activism. I think we all want to encourage people to do whatever they possibly can do to make the world a better place, right? So really, what can we do to set these examples? And what do you think about Pope Francis blessing this piece of art? What do you think about art in general as a revolutionary medium? I mean, it opens a lot of questions, this story, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like I said, you got to commend the guy for practicing what he preaches. Not many religious leaders will do that. I mean, they may talk, they may have a good rhetoric, but when it comes to actually practicing what they preach, very few do it. And I gotta give the guy my respect for actually doing things like blessing something that's being rejected by by different cathedrals. Like you said, standing up for the disparaged and the poor. Those are things that very few religious leaders are really actively participating in. So,
I also heard a story very recently about the 14th Dalai Lama, which I consider Pope Francis the 14th Dalai Lama. I mean, I'd love to see them in a pairing together, honestly.
Right.
But the story was that His Holiness was visiting the Vatican. He was walking down the halls. He wasn't being observed by anyone. This story came from one of his guards. And he was walking down a long hallway in the Vatican, and he was passing a statue of the Virgin Mary. And the guard said that he turned and he noticed the statue, he turned to it, and he put his hands together and he bowed to it, just by himself, alone, in a single gesture of respect and humility, and just continued walking, right? And that, I think, is really the exact thing Pope Francis was doing with this statue, is just a brief acknowledgement of the specialness of an idea, and then moving on, right? I mean, that's the message of religious tolerance. That's the message of spiritual acknowledgement, that it's not the icon or the idea or the ideology that's important. It's the action that's associated with it, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people could take a lot from that, Instead of just sitting around talking about these things, acknowledge the good, acknowledge the right in the world, and then in your action, try and create more good, try and create more positive, try and help people, try and do what your prophets did that made your religion the religion that it is. Live in that lifestyle. Try and be good people. Try and be as best as you can through your actions. Yeah. Your words don't mean anything, really. Words muddle up a lot of things. They create a lot of the controversy and the arguments that we have. But when you do something positive, when you do a good deed, you can't really refute a good action. A humble action.
Right.
And if more people were more focused on that and on helping others as best as they can, then we wouldn't have any time to sit around and argue back and forth about words, about what people should do. If you would just do it, then it's like the band Wookiefoot has a song about saying should do this and should do that. Just do it. Do what you're supposed to do. Do what your teachings tell you to do. Do the right thing. Help people. Help your fellow man. And don't tell people what they should do. Just do it. Be the change you want to see in the world. Is really what it comes down to.
I mean, there's a lyric from the band Defiance, Ohio. The song's called "I Don't Want Solidarity If It Means Holding Hands with You," and the lyric is, "Let's stop this talk about action, because action comes easily. It's the moments just before that are hard. It's that decision to take action is the hard part, But yeah, exactly. Is there any greater representation, by the way, in the Western tradition, of acting according to your spiritual principles than Christ hanging on the cross? I mean, the end of Christ's revolutionary journey was being killed by the Roman Empire for political sedition, right? Is there any greater real allegory? Why are Christians then so loath to fight against injustice in their societies when Christ himself died fighting the injustice in his society?
I think that's a good point. That's a powerful image.
Christ hanging on the cross? My God, yes.
It's incredible. And now, I would like to throw something out there to everyone out there. And I don't want this to sound as a universal thing in which I'm saying of all Christian churches. And this is not about the Catholic Church. This is about the Christian, essentially the born again Christian faith. I've been in a few of those churches. I enjoy going into various churches just to see how they're designed. I'm intrigued by religious buildings. And a lot of the Christian churches that I've been in, the born again style churches, they don't have the crucifix anywhere. And I feel like that is removing a very large message of the faith. I was in one specifically where they were projecting just the cross on a screen through a projector. And I found that to be a huge disassociation from the symbology of the cross. And maybe that's just my own personal take from it. But, when you look at the crucifix, there's all religious symbolism has power behind it. Symbols, there are certain symbols in this world that have incredible amounts of power. Yeah. And Jesus on the cross is one of them. And when you're of that faith and you remove that symbol, one of the core symbols of your faith from your building that you're practicing your faith in, I feel like that takes away a lot of the message behind the faith system that you're in. And maybe that's just me. I'd be interested to know how many born again churches out there, because obviously I've never been in every single one of them. But like I said, the ones I've been in, I have yet to be in a born again church that has that crucifix in their church, in the actual in the church itself. We're with the stage, and I don't call the born again I don't call them altars. I call them a stage, because it's not an altar. It's but that again, that's also my
it's where your local Christian rock band can play on the weekend, and they serve punch and cookies.
Yeah.
But you're right. It seems to me, and you could trace the evolution of the crucifix, the cross, back a very long ways. There's a good documentary called Constantine's Sword you should check out. But really, one view of the crucifix is a challenge. Christ suffered for his belief. Christ sacrificed for his belief. What will you do? Right? It's a challenge to you. If you truly believe in the emancipatory potential of Christendom, in salvation, in redemption, what lengths are you willing to go to follow that belief? Because Christ hung on the cross for 3 days for his belief. And look, I'm approaching this viewing Christ as a mortal man who suffered, who felt pain, not as a god, but as a mortal man. And that kind of suffering is the same kind of suffering that, Gandhi went through, Martin Luther King went through, Malcolm X went through, all the revolutionaries. It's an archetype, exactly, the hero's journey, it's Joseph Campbell kind of shit.
Yeah.
So, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to people. What are you willing to do? It's a constant remembrance of the suffering that it takes to change the world.
And I like the word they use, the passion.
Yeah.
This man was revered as some sort of radical hero, was turned on by one of his closest friends, was ridiculed, was humiliated, was put on the cross, suffered, and then and then as the story goes, the redemption, the rising from the dead, the physical enlightenment, totally sort of the embodied enlightenment is one of the most beautiful, even if it wasn't literally true, is one of the most beautiful stories of our own innate human potential that I've ever really encountered.
I agree, and honestly, if we're going to delve into that, just like the story itself, I think the resurrection is the least interesting portion of the Christ story. I think the climax of the Christ story is when Christ is hanging on the cross and he lifts his head to the sky and he says, "Father, why hast thou forsaken me?" That passage right there holds a really deep emotional impact for me, because it shows then that this character in this book, regardless of whether or not you believe in his divinity or what you believe about Christ, or if you just interpret it as a story, that is the focal point of the story. That's that beauty where this person who is filled with this conviction and righteousness in the very end has this moment of doubt. It's so humanizing. It shows him as being mortal, as being human. It connects him with us in a very special way. I think that's the most beautiful part of the New Testament. Father, why hast thou forsaken me? That's
it really is
very powerful, I think.
Yeah, the Christ character is one of the most incredible figures in all of religious texts.
Sure.
The man was the definition of a radical. He was the most revolutionary figure, really, that I can think of in history.
Certainly in the West.
It's just amazing to me how many people forget that, and they twist and they convolute his words, and now obviously there's going to be people out there that are going to. This is gonna start a huge argument, but the fact of the matter is there was no one taking notes during the time of Christ.
No.
All of these books were written after Christ died.
At least 80 to 120 years thereafter his death, from what we know.
This is all third party source of what it was that he was saying. But if you just look at the words that are in the Bible, some of the specific quotes, "The kingdom of heaven lies within," these were things that I think that's really my favorite quote of Jesus, of Christ, because I think that is a statement, a challenge to everyone.
Yeah.
That your heaven, your spiritual essence is inside of you, and it's your responsibility to cultivate that and to live in these teachings and to be a person of change and of good to society, to create this positive society for the world, through your action and through getting in touch with your own personal essence first. Each person needs to be aware of who they are and to truly understand where they stand before they can go out and really change the world and change the world in a positive way, because it's not easy. It's not easy to go out there and to act like Christ did. Your views are going to be challenged, and you're going to go through a lot of strife. I mean, I think the entire story of Christ is a perfect allegory for the human struggle of trying to be a truly spiritual and righteous person, of doing good. You're constantly going to be faced with this adversity. You're constantly going to have people who are going to go against you and are going to challenge you and betray you and have all these things happen to you. And it's about staying the course. It's about, knowing what is right and knowing what is good for everyone, and to continue doing that. And I think that's really the core of the Christ story, and I think that's a beautiful message. And I feel that gets lost in so many people of the Christian faith, and they forget that this is a calling to each individual person who accepts Christ as their Savior, as this message that this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to follow in the footsteps of Christ. You're supposed to continue what He started. And it first takes you to look yourself in the mirror and say, can I do this? Can I really be what I'm saying that I am? Talk is cheap. Action speaks. And Christ spoke through action. Yeah, He spoke great words, but it's the action that people remember. It's that Him on the cross. That is the ultimate sign of action.
It is. Right. It is. I think it's telling that, in the modern world, the person who seems to have understood and followed Christ's message best was like, Gandhi quoted the New Testament all the time, who actually is a messianic Christ-like figure. I mean, he's ranked with Christ in a lot of ways, and kind of as a messianic prophetic figure. And he was a Hindu,
Yeah, exactly.
But it shows you that those core messages then at the root of religious faith are the same.
And let's not forget that Hindus, use Christ as a deity in their religion.
As an avatar of Vishnu, yeah. They incorporated the Christian message into their own faith. That's how, Hinduism is so organic and flexible, That's why there's still I think it's the third largest religion, Hinduism. I mean, there's about 1 billion Hindus.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
And I think really going back to the beginning of this all, if Pope Francis continues down the path in which he's going down, I think that when his time is up on this earth, that he will be looked at in a similar way, because if he continues these actions of good deeds and in trying to spark good deeds in others, I think we'll remember him as a person. He's getting started a little late, but we forget the amount of good things that he did in South America before he ever became Pope.
Absolutely.
I mean, he helped a ton of people.
Absolutely.
And now he's just getting the world stage now as the Pope, to enact these changes on a global level.
Right.
But he was doing a lot of good before he ever became Pope, and I just hope that he has a lot of more years left where he can do a lot of good for a lot of people. And in his legacy, hopefully, will be of helping the poor, helping fighting for equality, and living the way that Christ, his Savior, said that we should live.
Absolutely. If anyone can save the Catholic Church, it'll be Pope Francis.
Definitely.
Well, amen to that.
Absolutely.